The first thing the CEO noticed was the silence. A heavy, unnatural silence that fell over the boardroom the moment a small child stepped inside, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. The girl's shoes were worn, her sweater too big, her eyes wide with fear and determination. She stood alone at the end of a long glass table surrounded by powerful executives, and in that instant, something inside the CEO froze completely. Not because a child had wandered in, but because of what she was holding, and what it meant. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us what truly matters in life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. The CEO's name was Margaret Holloway, a woman known across the United States as relentless, precise, and emotionally untouchable. She had built her empire in Chicago through sleepless nights, ruthless negotiations, and an iron belief that feelings had no place in business. Her boardroom reflected that philosophy perfectly, all sharp edges, glass walls, and polished steel, perched high above the city where people like her ruled and people like the janitors remained invisible. That morning, the board was in the middle of a tense meeting about layoffs and restructuring, numbers being discussed with clinical detachment, when the door quietly opened. No one noticed at first. It was easy to ignore a janitor's child in a place like that. But then the girl took a few timid steps forward, her small hands shaking as she raised the paper above her head. Her name was Abigail Turner, 8 years old, with chestnut hair pulled into a messy ponytail and eyes that carried far more worry than a child's should. She had come to the office because she didn't know where else to go. Her father, Samuel Turner, had been cleaning this building for 6 years, working nights and early mornings, rarely seen, never remembered. That morning, he had collapsed in the supply closet, his body finally giving in after years of exhaustion and untreated pain. Abigail had been waiting in the break room with her coloring book when it happened. She had seen her father try to smile through the pain, the way he always did, the way he said everything would be fine even when it wasn't. When the ambulance came, one of the guards told her to wait, told her someone would come for her. But no one did. Hours passed, and all she had was the folded paper her father had dropped while cleaning the executive floor. On it was a faded photograph and a handwritten note, creased and stained from years of being carried in his pocket. The paper wasn't meant for the CEO. It wasn't meant for anyone important. But as Abigail stood there, too scared to speak, Margaret's eyes locked onto that photograph like it was a mirror from the past. Her breath caught. Her hands went cold. Because the man in the picture, younger, smiling, wearing a military uniform, was someone she had known once. Someone she had failed. Someone she had tried very hard to forget. Years ago, before the power suits and the boardroom, Margaret Holloway had been a scared woman herself, navigating grief after the death of her husband. Samuel Turner had been there during that time, a fellow church volunteer, a quiet man who fixed broken chairs, carried groceries for the elderly, and never asked for recognition. He had helped her through a charity project, had listened when she spoke about her fears, had once loaned her money when she was on the edge of losing everything. When her business finally took off, she promised herself she would repay him. But success came fast, and gratitude came slowly. Life moved on. Samuel disappeared from her world, and she never looked back. Now here was his daughter, standing in front of her, unknowingly reopening a chapter Margaret had buried deep beneath profit margins and public image. The executives shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to escort the child out or pretend she wasn't there. Margaret, however, couldn't move. She saw not a disruption, but a consequence. Abigail finally gathered the courage to step closer to the table and gently placed the paper down. She pointed to it with a trembling finger and explained, in a soft, uneven voice, that her dad had dropped it and that she didn't want it to get lost. She said he always kept it safe, like it was important. The words weren't dramatic, but they landed like a weight on Margaret's chest. Because she knew exactly why Samuel had kept that photo. It was from a time when helping someone mattered more than being someone. The meeting was forgotten. The numbers vanished. Margaret dismissed the board without explanation, something she had never done in her career. When the room finally emptied, she remained seated, staring at Abigail, seeing not inconvenience but responsibility. She learned about the hospital, about Samuel's condition, about the long nights, the skipped meals, the medical bills he could never afford. She learned how Abigail had grown up in cleaning closets and empty offices, how her father had taught her to be polite, quiet, invisible, because that was safer. The days that followed were a turning point. Margaret visited the hospital, standing at Samuel's bedside, overwhelmed by guilt and regret. She realized that while she had been building an empire, the man who once held her up had been scrubbing floors beneath her feet. She paid for his treatment without publicity, without announcements. She arranged for Abigail to have proper care, tutoring, stability. But more than that, she began to question everything she had become. Samuel survived, but recovery was slow. During that time, Margaret started showing up differently at work. She walked the floors. She learned names. She listened. Layoffs were reconsidered. Policies changed. The company began investing in employee health, education, and families, not because it looked good, but because it was right. People noticed. Not just the press, but the workers who had spent years believing they didn't matter. Abigail became a quiet presence in Margaret's life, a reminder that legacies aren't built in boardrooms alone. Sometimes they are rebuilt in moments of humility. Margaret never told the public about the little girl who walked into her boardroom. She didn't need to. The change spoke louder than any press release ever could. As time passed, Samuel returned to work, but not as a janitor. Margaret insisted on helping him find a role that honored his skills and dignity. He was hesitant, proud, uncomfortable with charity, but eventually understood that this wasn't charity. It was long overdue respect. Before we reach the end of this story, if this journey has touched your heart even a little, please pause for a moment and engage with this video. Like it, share it, and let us know in the comments that stories like this still matter. Your interaction helps spread kindness further than you may ever realize. The day Abigail returned to the building months later, she wasn't scared. She walked confidently beside her father, her shoes new but her heart the same. She looked up at the towering glass walls and smiled, knowing that even places built on power could be changed by something as small as honesty and courage. Margaret watched them from her office window, not as a CEO watching employees, but as a woman finally at peace with the person she was becoming. Just before the ending, we have one special request for you. Please comment below and tell us where you're watching from and what part of this story stayed with you the most. Your words mean more than you know. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing that can walk into a boardroom isn't money, influence, or authority. Sometimes, it's a little girl holding a piece of paper, reminding the world that no one is invisible unless we choose to look away.